Well, it seems that the Repulsor has acquired a repulsively big gun. Let's see just how much damage this thing can do. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where we're looking at Imperial units, specifically at Space Marines over the next few weeks. We've been going through the Space Marine Codex, unit by unit, and having a good proper look at the different tactics that can be applied to these units on the tabletop. Today's video we'll be talking about the Repulsor Executioner. We'll have a look at its war gear options, special rules, how it fits into your army, and all the different combos and tactics we can use with it on the tabletop. So, the Repulsor Executioner, it's a heavy support option in the new Space Marines Codex, and it's essentially a massive floating tank covered in all sorts of different guns. In the fluff, the Repulsor Executioner is to the Repulsor what the Razorback is to the Rhino. It sacrifices some of its transport capacity for additionally improved armaments, and they tend to carry smaller, more specialised squads, such as Hellblasters. Now this thing will typically cost around about 320 points, depending on the exact armaments that you give it. It is a large floating battle tank. Its base movement is 10, weapon skill 6, ballistic skill 3 up, strength 8, toughness 8, 16 wounds, 6 attacks, leadership 9, and a 3 up save. Like most vehicles, it degrades at less than half of its remaining wounds, so 8 wounds or less. At 8 wounds it will only have a movement of 5 and a ballistic skill of 4 up, and at 1 to 4 wounds it will have a movement of 3 and a ballistic skill of 5 up. As I mentioned before, this thing is absolutely covered in weapons. It has a primary turret, which always packs a heavy onslaught Gatling cannon, a 30-inch weapon that fires 12, strength 5, AP-1, damage 1 shots. Very nice. Then the turret has the option of either a macroplasma incinerator or a heavy laser destroyer. The macroplasma incinerator is the same as you will find on the Redemptor Dreadnought. It has a 36-inch range, heavy D6 shots, its strength 8, AP-4 and damage 1. When you overcharge it, it has a strength of 9 and a damage of 2, but every roll of 1 in the shooting phase will cause a mortal wound on your own model. One of the signature rules with this unit is that if it moves less than half its regular movement characteristic, so that will be 5 under normal circumstances, then you can fire the main weapon twice. So your macroplasma incinerator supercharge mode will be doing 2d6, strength 9, AP-4, 2 damage shots. So that's quite a lot of heavy dagger. Now its other ranged turret option is my favourite, and I think is the one that we'll most likely see people using on the actual battlefield. The heavy laser destroyer is 72-inch range, heavy 2, strength 10, AP-4, d6 damage. But when you roll that d6, any roll of a 1 or 2 counts as a 3, so you're never getting less than 3 damage out of this gun, and you're firing 4 shots typically when it moves less than half its movement, so that's a very, very nasty amount of firepower. Moving on from the turret, it has a ton of small arms weapons. Games Workshop being Games Workshop, they couldn't just make it simple and have them all similar. They all have different profiles, ranges, and serve as a bit of a headache when you're shooting the unit, to be honest. It has 2 Fragstorm grenade launchers, so they're the 18-inch range Assault D6 bolter shot weapons, 2 Storm bolters, a twin heavy bolter, a twin Icarus Iron Hail heavy stubber, and auto launchers. Auto launchers are its equivalent to smoke launchers. I think when you're thinking about the movement and positioning of this model, then you shouldn't really worry too much about all the secondary weapons. Basically, it's likely to get more shots the closer it is to the enemy, and you may as well just position it optimally for the main armament and then see what you can get out of the secondary weapons. If you want just a few more shots out of the secondary weapons, then you can also take a Iron Hail heavy stubber and an Icarus rocket pod. Both of these will set you back 6 points each, and I think they're probably worth including just to boost an additional few shots out of your model. I think the Icarus rocket pod in particular is certainly worth the extra 6 points, as it's a heavy D3 weapon, strength 7, AP-1, and 2 damage. So it's quite similar to a 24-inch range autocannon, which in my mind is quite good for a 6-point investment. As with all of the Icarus weapons, It gets a +1 to hit against fly units and a -1 to hit against ground units that don't have the fly keyword. All of these secondary weapons add up to a whole load of anti-infantry firepower. If you completely ignore the main big gun that gets to fire twice, then it will get 44 shots on average if you're within 18 inches and stationary. That will drop off a bit if you're outside 18 inches or on the move, but in any case its anti-infantry firepower is certainly going to shred a lot of soft targets. This model has a bunch of special rules. Firstly, Angels of Death, which gives it access to the tactical doctrines, of which the Devastator doctrine is typically going to be the most useful, giving -1 to its main weapon and also almost all of its little secondary additional weapons. They can be even nastier when they're AP -2 instead of AP -1. It gets Shock Assault for 7 pretty rubbish attacks on the charge, and it gets Bolter Discipline, so if you're stationary you'll fire the Storm Bolters for 8 shots at 24-inch range, which isn't too bad either. Aquilon Optics is the posh word for its move at half speed, fire main weapon twice rule, and it must target the same target both times. Like the standard Repulsor and the Impulsor, it has the Repulsor Field special rule, so if you choose to select the Repulsor Executioner as a target for your charge, then you have -2 to your charge roll, which could easily prevent charges out of Deep Strike. Again, like the Repulsor, it has the power of the Machine Spirit rule, so it doesn't suffer any penalty for moving and firing heavy weapons. So essentially, most of the time you may as well move 5 inches to better position the Repulsor. It's pretty handy as I said, most of the secondary weapons are heavy, such as the Heavy Stubbers and the Heavy Bolter and the Heavy Onslaught Gatling Cannon. It has the Explodes rule, so when it dies, on a 6 it will blow up for D6 mortal wounds within 6 inches of the Repulsor Executioner. This really isn't something that you want to be happening in the middle of your own lines, so if you think it might be at risk, it's probably worth saving a CP to re-roll that if you do roll the dreaded 6 when your opponent kills it. As I mentioned before, it's a transport and it can transport up to 6 Primaris infantry models, and models in Gravis armor count as 2 models for transport purposes. Frankly, this thing is already enough of a target in the first place without putting more valuable things inside it, but the option to have aggressors, for example, screened from the enemy shooting turn 1, is not a bad option. So, how would I field it on the battlefield? As I said earlier, I think that my choice for the main turret weapon would be the Heavy Laser Destroyer over the Macroplasma Incinerator. Marines usually have quite a lot of access to damage 2 weapons, so I don't think they're quite as in desperate need of having another massive plasma gun. The Heavy Laser Destroyer has a much greater range, which really is a factor when you're talking about a 36-inch range gun that doesn't want to be moving more than 5 inches per turn. It also has a better damage profile against heavy tanks. For example, if you're firing at a Lehman Russ, the Heavy Laser Destroyer will on average do 7.1 damage when it is not buffed, and the Macroplasma Incinerator will do an average of 6 when overcharged, and also on average 1 wound to itself, which is never really a good thing. I don't think that the Macroplasma Incinerator is a bad option by any means, and it's very good against mowing down certain targets such as Primaris Marines. I'm just saying that I think that the Heavy Laser Destroyer is going to be more useful in more situations. Marines don't have all that many things that can reach out and touch, say, a Basilisk or a Lehman Russ tank that's parked at the back of the opponent's deployment zone, and this really gives them an extra tool in their arsenal for taking out those annoying targets. As I said again, I would also take the Iron Hail Heavy Stubber and the Icarus Rocket Pod for the extra 12 points it costs. You're going to be wanting to put as many buffs on this thing as you possibly can, so having an extra couple of guns to receive all those buffs at a very cheap cost is a good idea. So, what are the combos that we can come up with for buffing this unit and making it very nasty? First of all, I'm going to say that the best chapter to field a Repulsor Executioner with is the Iron Hands chapter, for multiple reasons. Firstly, for its points it's actually quite squishy, at only toughness 8, 16 wounds, where people are gearing up to kill knights which have more wounds and invul saves. So an extra 6 up Feel No Pain is very good to start with. Being able to overwatch on 5s with all of those little guns makes it a really scary target to charge, and also not degrading until it is 4 wounds or less will really help it to maintain a great damage output throughout the whole game. There are a couple of epic Iron Hands buffs that you can put on this unit as well. Iron Father Phyros, which I covered in a different review video, is the Repulsor Executioner's best friend. He can give it a 5+ invul save, he can heal it for up to 6 wounds per turn, and he can make it hit on a 2-up. This guy couldn't really be any better to buff these guys, and the Iron Hands doctrine also lets it reroll 1s innately, so you don't even need a captain to have this thing hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s. Just phenomenal. Also, Iron Hands will love to be in the Devastator doctrine, which is the one that this tank wants to be in, as it'll give it an extra -1 on all of its weapons, most notably the Heavy Onslaught Gatling Cannon for 12 Strength 5 AP -2 shots. There's one more combo with the Iron Hands that makes it even better, which is the Iron Stone, so have, say, a Lieutenant with the Iron Stone standing next to the tank, and it will take 1 less damage for every multi-damage weapon that hits it. So say, if you hit it with a damage 3 weapon, it'll only take 2 damage. All of these combined will make this thing horrendously hard to shift, and put it up to being competitive against Knights. People weren't very convinced about the Repulsor Executioner when they saw the points cost, but these additional buffs, I believe, make it viable, because it will let it reroll wound rolls of 1. Because why wouldn't you throw another 17% damage buff on top of all of the other buffs that you've just stacked? Hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, and rerolling 1s to wound will on average do 11.6 wounds to a Lehman Russ battle tank, so that's a very, very good chance of just shooting it to death with 1 shot from this gun. I don't need to say how good that is, when Lehman Russ tank commanders are very common in the meta at the moment, and they can cost around 200 points to field. On a good turn, this tank could easily make its points cost back in 1 round of shooting. Other notable chapters that you could field this with include the Ultramarines. They could give it 4 rerolls to wound against a certain enemy target via a certain relic that I've forgotten the name of right now. Ultramarines are another decent choice because their super doctrine, while they're in the tactical doctrine, Signs of Gulliman, will mean that it counts as stationary at all times when the tactical doctrine is in effect, so you can happily move it 10 inches and still double tap with that big gun and fire the Storm Bolters with Bolter Discipline for 8 shots at 24-inch range. All of these are good things. Raven Guard aren't awful, as they will give it a 2-up save through being in cover when you're further than 12 inches away. And Salamanders also isn't too bad because of the Master Artisan's rule, giving them a reroll to hit and reroll to wound, which just synergize really, really well with the Heavy Laser Destroyer. You could also put it in a successor chapter, so give it the Master Artisan's rerolls, Stealthy for the 2-up save, and make it an Iron Hands successor to use their Calculated Fury doctrine to let it reroll 1s to hit with its heavy weapons at all times. If you're not running it next to Mr. Iron Father Phyros, then you should definitely consider buying a Chapter Master or a Chaplain to increase the ballistic skill and give good rerolls to all of its many, many guns. The Chaplain can use the Recitation of Focus Litany, which adds 1 to the hit roll, by the way. Now, there are a couple of stratagems to consider when you're using a repulsor from the main Space Marines Codex. Firstly, there's a new Hunter Slayer missile stratagem, where for 1 CP, a repulsor can make a roll. If it's greater than or equal to the model's ballistic skill, then the target takes D3 mortal wounds if it's a vehicle or monster. Now, this is actually a lot better than the standard flak missile or hellfire shell stratagems, because unlike them, you don't have to forfeit shooting a weapon to use this. This is just literally additional mortal wounds, so it's not bad at all, really. I can't say I'd use it very often, but say if you come to the end of your shooting phase and there's 1 vehicle or monster that has 1 or 2 wounds left, this could be a really nice cheeky way to finish it off. Just an aside, you can only use this for each repulsor once per battle. Next one I've noted is Armour of Contempt. As this is a big meaty unit, your opponent might try and position a lot of Psychers to smite it to death. If that happens, then you can trigger this stratagem for 1 CP, and on a 5-up it ignores mortal wounds. This lasts until the end of the phase and could be helpful to reduce the damage that it takes in a pinch. And the last and most interesting one that I've seen is Vengeance of the Machine Spirit. Now, this is a really interesting strategic option. So this is a stratagem that affects the repulsor or repulsor executioner when it dies. For 2 CP, that repulsor can either explode automatically or fire one of its ranged weapons as if it were the shooting phase. The first option to auto-explodes could potentially devastate your opponent's army. If you think your Repulsor Executioner is about to die and it's sort of near a lot of his valuable units, it could well be worth just literally shooting with your Repulsor and then charging it into something nasty that you know will finish it off, then auto-exploding it and handing out d6 mortal wounds to every single enemy unit within 6 inches. If he has a lot of things clustered up that your Repulsor is near, then this could potentially just win you the game in one fell swoop. Unlike some similar stratagems like the stratagem to explode a knight in the Knight's Codex, it just automatically happens. You don't even have to roll a dice on a 4-up it explodes, it just does it. So this is one of the easiest ways to get loads of mortal wounds through on your opponent. Admittedly situational, but you should really remember this if you think your Repulsor is about to die next to enemy units. To shoot a weapon as if it were the shooting phase obviously means firing the main weapon of the Repulsor at something in your opponent's army. Because of the way that the Aquilon Optics rule is worded, then it was your last movement phase. If it moved less than half its normal max move distance, then it can still fire that weapon twice when you use this stratagem. Admittedly, it will be hitting on 5s normally, as your Repulsor will be on its bottom bracket. But if you have a Chapter Master nearby, then it could be hitting on 5s re-rolling everything, which is a lot better. Or if you've been using a Chaplain to apply the recitation of Focus Liturgy, then it will be hitting on, say, a 4-up, maybe a 4-up re-rolling, if you have both of them. Now, how I would use this is if it's your opponent's shooting phase, then I would try and target something that's low on health that's in his army. So say he shot you with a Leman Russ battle tank, and there is a Basilisk next door to it that hasn't shot so far. I would target the Basilisk, and you might even prevent it from shooting in the same shooting phase when your opponent was planning on being able to use it to kill another unit. If your opponent has just brought in a fragile unit in from reserve that he was counting on being able to use all of its nasty guns before it died the next turn, you might just be able to kill it before it even gets to shoot, which would be very, very good. It's definitely a stratagem to have in the back of your mind. So, overall, how would I rate the Repulsor Executioner? I believe in the right builds this can be top tier competitive, particularly with the Iron Hands castle that I was talking about before, with Iron Father Phyros and the Ironstone. I could happily run 2 or 3 of these in a list, particularly as that means that if one of them gets shot to death, then you will still have the other 2 to shoot. I strongly suspect that your opponent will not be able to kill multiple Repulsor Executioners per turn, so if you have multiple, it gives you that nice extra little bit of redundancy. Ideally, you'd also want other big threatening units that will draw fire from them, so they'd also work very well in a list with multiple Executioners and maybe a few of the new Invicta Warsuits that can draw all of the enemy's fire by being about to charge them on the first turn. I know we've been talking about Iron Hands quite a bit in this video. I'm shortly planning on making an Iron Hands Codex review, just highlighting all of the things that I think are really useful and are worth taking in the army out of the Codex. So if you'd like to see that at a later date, please feel free to subscribe. Auspex Tactics will be more than happy to have you along for the ride. Thank you for listening, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.